the salt-laced wind shriek a warning across the fjord, but Thyra Eriksdottir heard only the hollow echo of her father's skull splitting. She was hidden, a shadow between two weathered longhouses, her young fists pressed against her mouth to smother the scream that would have revealed her. It wasn't the sound of the axe that froze her blood. She was a Viking girl, and the sounds of death were as familiar as the cry of gulls. It was the silence that followed. The brutal, final silence that swallowed the roar of Jarl Erik Ironhide and left only the triumphant snarl of his betrayer, Sven the Serpent. Thyra was 12, but in that moment she ceased to be a child. The brilliant, cold blue of the Norseland sky, the familiar, comforting smell of wood smoke and fish, the entire world of her childhood, it all shattered. All that remained was a razor-sharp shard of vengeance. The massacre of Jarl Erik's household in the settlement of Hravsvek, or Raven's Cove, was swift and brutal. A cold-blooded coup orchestrated by Sven, a former trusted huskarl, or housecarl, who had nurtured a venomous ambition for years. Sven, a man whose smile never reached his ice-chip eyes, had waited for Erik to be vulnerable, his strongest warriors campaigning far to the south. Thyra watched the red fog lift, leaving behind the gray reality of ash and blood. Her mother, Astrid, a woman of formidable will and keen mind, had been dragged away screaming, destined to be a hostage, or worse, in Sven's new court. She knew she could not save her mother yet. Survival and the long, bitter road to retribution was the only path. Clutching the carved wooden raven her father had given her, Thyra fled into the dense, brooding forests of the interior. She didn't weep. Tears were a luxury of the safe. Instead, she whispered an oath to the old gods, to Odin and Tyr, the gods of war and justice. By the iron of the north, by the blood of my father, and by the eternal flame of Valhalla, I swear, Sven will know the taste of my steel. I will not rest until the serpent is headless and my father's name is sung in the halls of the honored dead. The next 6 years were a crucible. Thyra found refuge in the isolated mountain steading of her father's brother, Un the Silent, a former warrior who had left the life of raiding for the solitary, harsh work of a trapper and blacksmith. Un, a man of few words but profound skill, saw the fire in her niece's eyes and understood the depth of her loss. He did not try to domesticate the fury. He focused it. Un was a master smith. He taught Thyra the secrets of iron, how to coax it from the earth, how to temper it with fire and water, how to shape it into tools of survival and instruments of death. He taught her the weight and balance of an axe, not as a woman's tool for splitting firewood, but as a warrior's weapon for splitting shields and helms. A blade knows no gender, Thyra, he grunted one frigid morning as they hammered glowing steel. It knows only sharpness, balance, and the will of the hand that guides it. He taught her the history of the North, the complex political tapestry of the small warring jarls, the shifting alliances, the deep-seated rivalries, and the rising power of the King of Norway, Harald Fairhair, who was slowly, inexorably unifying the scattered petty kingdoms. Thyra devoured the knowledge. Vengeance, she learned, was not just about strength. It was about strategy, information, and timing. Un also trained her body. Thyra was tall, strong-boned, and tireless. She ran the mountain trails until her lungs burned, wrestled the young bears untrapped before releasing them, and practiced with the axe and shield until her muscles screamed and her calluses bled. She learned the stealth of the hunter, the patience of the trapper, and the brutal efficiency of the Viking warrior. But the world would not accept a female warrior. The sagas spoke of shield maidens, but they were legends, not common sight. A lone woman traveling would be seen as prey, a bride or a slave, never a threat. Thyra knew her true strength would be her undoing before she could reach Sven. She needed a mask, a new identity, a skin of iron and anonymity. One biting autumn evening, 6 years after the massacre, Un looked at the now 18-year-old Thyra, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom. He handed her a newly crafted, formidable axe with a crescent-shaped head forged from the finest steel he could manage, its handle wrapped in the treated hide of a wolf. "It is time, child," he said, his voice raw, "but Thyra cannot leave this place." Thyra knew what she must do. Over the course of a week, with unskilled hands and grim silence, she transformed herself. She cut her long flame-red hair short, leaving it rugged and unruly. She wrapped her firm chest tight with thick linen bindings. She donned the heavy, protective leather and mail of a warrior, disguising the subtle curves of her body. She practiced lowering her voice, hardening her stare, and walking with the broad-shouldered, swaggering confidence of a man who fears nothing. Finally, she stood before a polished bronze shield, no longer the girl Thyra, but a hardened warrior. "What is your name, Huskarl?" unchallenged, his own eyes testing the disguise. "I am Thord Ulfson, the son of the wolf." Thord Ulfson, with a small purse of coins, the magnificent wolf axe, a serviceable sword, and a heart forged in the heat of hatred, descended from the mountains. His first goal was simple: find a Jarl who would accept a skilled but unknown warrior into his company, and whose territory bordered or was involved in conflict with Sven the Serpent's domain. He traveled south, moving through villages and small towns, listening, learning, and above all, performing. To maintain the deception, he couldn't afford a single slip. In a smoky tavern in the port town of Vikshaven, he found a challenge. A brute of a local champion, a man named Knut Skullsplitter, was demanding protection money. Knut, a mountain of muscle and blubber, sneered at the sight of the lean, dark-haired youth. "Look what the fish dragged in. Get out, boy, before I use your skull to hold my mead." "I am Thord Ulfson," Thyra said, keeping her voice low and even, her eyes fixed at the man. "And I do not pay brigands. I cut them down." The fight was fast and brutal. Knut relied on sheer size and rage. Thyra relied on Un's training, speed, precise movement, and the ruthless exploitation of weakness. She let Knut's wild swings exhaust him, danced around his powerful but slow attacks, and when he lunged in frustration, she dodged, spun, and brought the back spike of her axe's head down in a devastating blow to the man's exposed shoulder. Knut roared, his arm instantly useless. Before he could recover, the flat of Thyra's sword slammed into his temple, sending him sprawling into the muck. The crowd, which had been hostile, now roared with applause. The local Jarl's lieutenant, a scarred, shrewd man named Ragnar, stepped forward. He hadn't clapped, but his eyes were sharp with interest. "You fight well, Thord Ulfson. Too well for a boy who just walked out of the woods. What is your lineage?" Thyra kept the story simple and mostly true. "My father was a trapper, a hard man. He taught me to fight. I seek to make my fortune, to earn a warrior's death and perhaps a warrior's place in Valhalla." Ragnar nodded slowly. The Viking world respected raw skill more than titles. "Our Jarl Knut, the Red, is always in need of men who can wield steel. He raids the coastal settlements to the east, settlements that pay homage to a certain Jarl Sven." Thyra's heart hammered a rhythm against her ribs that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. The gods, it seemed, had already drawn the first line on the map of her revenge. "I will serve Jarl Knut,"
she replied, her voice firm, "as long as he seeks glory, and as long as there are worthy foes to meet." Ragnar gave a grim smile. "Glory and foes we have in abundance, Ulfson. Welcome to the wolf pack." Thyra had a foothold. The girl was gone. Thord Ulfson, the new warrior, had been born in fire and raised on an oath. Her journey to Sven's throat had begun. Thord Ulfson's integration into Jarl Knut the Red's wolf pack was not seamless, but her competence quickly silenced any serious dissent. Ragnar, the shrewd lieutenant, assigned Thord to the lowest rank, a shield-bearer to a grizzled, suspicious veteran named Bjorn the Bear. Bjorn had fought beside Knut for 20 years and valued trust above all.
The long boats of the wolf pack were Thyra's new world. She learned the harsh rhythm of the North Sea, the relentless spray, the biting cold, the back-breaking labor of rowing for days on end, and the terrifying, exhilarating adrenaline rush of a coastal raid. Her greatest challenge wasn't the enemy's axe, but the constant, grueling proximity of the men. Maintaining the disguise. Thyra lived in perpetual tension. She slept fully clothed, wrapped tightly in her rough wool cloak, feigning a deep exhaustion that masked her vigilance. Bathing was a solo affair, always at the edges of the camp, under the guise of scouting or fetching water. She adopted the crude, simple humor of the men, speaking little about herself and diverting personal questions with tales of her father's solitary life in the mountains. Her greatest ally in the disguise was her sheer physical prowess. The men respected strength, and Thord Ulfson was deceptively strong. She could hold the line in a shield wall for hours and swing her axe with a precise, devastating energy that matched men twice her size. The first raid and the rise. Their first raid under Thord's axe was against a wealthy, isolated farmstead on a spit of land that Sven the Serpent had recently claimed as tribute. It was a skirmish, not a battle, but it was bloody enough. As the wolf pack disembarked, an arrow from a hidden farmer's bow struck Bjorn the Bear in the thigh, splintering his shield and knocking him down. In the chaos, before the defenders could press their advantage, Thord reacted. She didn't panic or freeze. She dropped her gear, grabbed Bjorn's heavy, fallen shield, and covered him while simultaneously returning fire with a vicious volley of hand axes she carried hidden beneath her cloak.
Her quick thinking saved Bjorn from a fatal thrust. Once the threat was neutralized, she efficiently bound Bjorn's wound, and then, without being asked, took charge of the flanking maneuver, clearing the way for the rest of the warriors. Later, around the fire, Bjorn, a man rarely given to praise, looked Thord in the eye, ignoring the curious stares of the others. "You are not like the others, Ulfson," Bjorn growled, the firelight reflecting in his hard gaze. "You fight with purpose, not just for loot or blood. What drives you?" Thyra looked into the flames, her voice flat. "The cold, the emptiness. I want gold and land enough to fill the void, Bear, and I fight the only way I know, to survive." Bjorn grunted, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps acceptance in his eyes. The warrior's code was simple: survival and loyalty. By saving his life, Thyra had proven both. From that day, Bjorn was a staunch, if silent, ally, and Ragnar noted the display of competence and discipline. The geopolitics of vengeance. Thyra was not just a warrior, she was a spy. She listened intently to the fireside talk, piecing together the political puzzle. Jarl Knut the Red was a minor, ambitious jarl whose lands lay on the rugged periphery of the consolidating Norwegian kingdom. He saw Sven the Serpent not just as an enemy, but as a wealthy rival to be plundered. Sven's power base, Serpent's Hold, was deep inland, near a major trade route, making it less vulnerable to sea raids. He was growing rich by taxing the trade and using his new wealth to hire mercenaries, Frankish swordsmen, and Russ archers, a clear sign of his rising ambition. More disturbingly, whispers suggested Sven was maneuvering to marry a powerful Jarl's daughter to solidify his claim to Eric's former territories, a move that would make him nearly untouchable. Thyra knew her window of opportunity was closing. She needed to get closer to Sven, not just raid his borders. After a year of relentless campaigning, Thord Ulfsson was no longer a junior warrior. She was a tested veteran, respected for her skill with the axe, her cool head in battle, and her strategic mind. Ragnar, impressed, promoted her to a sub-lieutenancy, giving her command of a small contingent of the shield wall. The decisive clash came not at sea, but on land. Jarl Knut the Red decided to challenge Sven directly for control of a valuable salt mining territory. It was a proper, full-scale Viking battle, involving hundreds of men. The Battle of Salt Fjord. The two forces met on a muddy plain. Thyra stood in the front rank of the wolf-pack shield wall, the cold steel of her axe comforting in her grip. Across the field, she saw them, Sven's banners, marked with the twisting green serpent of his sigil. And then she saw Sven himself, larger, coarser than she remembered, encased in polished mail, his face contorted in a sneering confidence. The battle began with a terrifying clash of wood and iron. The sound was deafening, a relentless drum of blows on the shields. Thyra moved with calculated efficiency. She didn't seek glory, she sought survival and weakness. She used her smaller stature to her advantage, ducking beneath the wild swings of heavier men and striking up into the unarmored lower joints. Mid-battle, a terrible sight nearly broke her composure. The wolf-pack's line wavered, pushed back by a wedge of Sven's imported Frankish swordsmen. These were professional soldiers, better drilled and armored than many Vikings. Jarl Knut, fighting fiercely, suddenly stumbled, his shield arm wounded. Sven, seeing his chance, broke from his own guard with a triumphant roar and lunged towards the exposed Knut. "Kill the Jarl!" Sven screamed. It was the moment Thyra had waited for. Forgetting caution, forgetting the mask of Thord Ulfsson, she surged forward. She didn't use the measured swings of a line fighter. She threw her body into a desperate, flying tackle, slamming her shoulder into Sven just as his axe was about to land. The blow sent both men sprawling. Thyra scrambled up instantly, using the confusion to shield Knut with her own body. Sven's bodyguard rushed in, but Thyra was a whirlwind of practiced fury. She blocked two swords, then drove the spike of her axe into the kneecap of the first man, followed by a swift, vertical chop to the helmet of the second, sending him crashing down. She was fighting with a raw, desperate energy the wolf pack had never seen. The sight of their Jarl nearly killed, then saved by the seemingly feral defense of Thord Ulfsson, rallied the wolf pack. They roared and pushed forward, driving Sven's men back. Sven, seeing the tide turn and his guards falling, glared at Thyra, at the young warrior who had thrown a wrench into his victory. Their eyes locked for a fleeting second across the carnage. "Who are you, dog?" Sven spat, his face a mask of furious shock. "A debt collector, serpent," Thyra whispered, a voice only for him. But before she could press her attack, Sven's retreating forces pulled him back. Jarl Knut the Red was saved. Sven was defeated, humiliated, and forced to retreat to Serpent's Hold. But for Thyra, the battle had been a near-fatal exposure. She had revealed a personal, burning hatred that went beyond the mercenary's loyalty. The victory at Salt Fjord was enormous. Jarl Knut was permanently wounded in his arm, but alive and victorious. He called Thord into his great hall, now draped with the captured banners of the serpent. "You saved my life, Ulfsson," Jarl Knut said, his voice raspy but firm. "You fought like a madman, like a man possessed by the berserker spirit. Why?"
Thyra kneeled, her head bowed. Jarl, I was taught that the debt of the salt and the bread is as sacred as the debt of blood. You gave me a place, a shield, and a chance. I would rather die than see that trust betrayed. Jarl Knut studied her long and hard. He saw a youth with scars earned in his service, a face carved from granite, and eyes that held an unreadable ancient sorrow. He did not see a girl, but he saw a fierce, unyielding loyalty. I believe you, Thord, Jarl Knut declared, his voice ringing through the hall. I can use a man who fights with the fire of the gods. I give you the title of Hirdman, a permanent member of my personal guard, and I give you this. He reached to his belt and unclasped a heavy, silver-worked gelt knife, a sign of immense favor and trust. He did more than just promote her. He made her part of his inner circle, privy to strategy, politics, and the most sensitive secrets of the wolf pack. This was precisely what Thyra needed. As a Hirdman, she would be near the Jarl constantly. Knut was now obsessed with crushing Sven the Serpent entirely, and a final campaign was already being planned. This campaign would lead Thyra straight to the stone walls of Serpent's Hold, and directly to the man who had stolen her life.
As a trusted herdman, a warrior of the inner circle, Thyra, still known as Thord Ulfson, gained unfettered access to Jarl Knut's strategic planning sessions. She learned that Sven the Serpent was not just defeated, he was wounded and cornered. The victory at Saltfjord had severely depleted his army, and the constant coastal raiding by Knut's forces was throttling his vital trade revenues. The plan was simple: a massive, final siege on Serpent's Hold, Sven's formidable fortress carved into a mountainside overlooking the inland trade routes. Jarl Knut planned the assault for the late spring, allowing his own men to recuperate and ensuring the mountain passes would be clear of snow. The spy's game. Thyra used her new status to gather crucial intelligence. She spent hours studying Sven's movements, his known weaknesses, and the layout of his fortress, not from maps, but from the detailed, drunken boasts of captured prisoners and the wary reports of the spies Knut employed. She learned 3 critical things. The folly of greed. Sven, in his haste to secure his hold on Eric's territories, had invested heavily in foreign mercenaries, the Frankish swordsmen and Rus archers. These men were loyal only to gold. If their payment was delayed or their prospects for plunder looked bleak, their loyalty would shatter. The hidden path. All major Viking forts had a secret means of access, usually a well, a privy exit, or a supply tunnel known only to the Jarl and his most trusted advisors. Sven's lair was rumored to have an old, rarely used mine shaft at the base of the mountain, left over from when the Vikings first sought iron ore in the area. It was said to connect directly to the lower storerooms. The hostage. The most vital piece of information. Thyra's mother Astrid was not kept as an ordinary prisoner. Sven knew Astrid possessed a deep knowledge of her late husband's wealth and political connections. She was being held in the inner keep, a stone tower within the main fortress walls, waiting to be married off in a political maneuver designed to legalize Sven's death of the jarlship. The knowledge of her mother's confinement hardened Thyra's resolve. She could not wait for the siege. She needed to act before Sven could leverage her mother's status, or worse, decide to dispose of her before the battle. The weight of the lie. The relentless pressure of maintaining the disguise began to weigh on her. She felt like a phantom, a living ghost of a warrior, constantly listening for the smallest inflection in her voice, a grace in her movement, or a moment of vulnerability. One evening, Bjorn the bear, now a firm supporter, found Thyra cleaning her axe alone in the longhouse shadows. He didn't speak of war, but of home. "You speak little of your mother, Thord," he observed. his voice surprisingly gentle. A man carries the memory of his mother like the weight of his shield, a quiet burden. Tyra kept her head down, polishing the familiar wolf head pommel. "She is dead to me, Bjorn," she replied, her voice rough with forced callousness. "Died when I was young. I carry nothing but the steel I wield." Bjorn merely nodded, but his gaze was knowing, and for a terrifying second, Tyra thought he saw through the years of deception. He didn't challenge her. Instead, he placed a massive, calloused hand on her shoulder. "Then carry the memory of your father," he said, and the tone was a warning. "He made you what you are. Never forget that. A Viking who forgets his past is a leaf lost to the storm." Tyra felt the deep, agonizing sting of the truth in his words. She was forgetting her past, or rather, hiding it so well that the deception threatened to consume her. She had to remind herself daily, Thord Olsen is a tool. Tyra Eriksdottir is the purpose.
The final planning meeting for the siege was a fortnight before the intended date of departure. Jarl Knut laid out the brute force strategy, a frontal assault on the main gates, backed by archers and siege weaponry, a bloody, costly maneuver. Thyra raised her hand. As a herdman, she had the right to speak. "Jarl Knut," she began, her voice commanding the attention of the grizzled veterans. "Sven's greatest strength is his inner wall, protected by those foreign archers. A frontal assault will cost us hundreds of lives. Our greatest weapon is not our shield wall, but our stealth and surprise." She paused, pointing to a rough drawing of Serpent's Hold. "I propose a small, rapid strike force, led by myself. We will use the old mine tunnel, the one rumored to be disused. We can enter the fortress beneath the wall, neutralize the archers from the inside, and secure the gatehouse. A quick, clean strike that saves your men and saves time." The hall fell silent. Such a mission was practically a death sentence. "You speak of shadows, Ulfsson, and of rumors. Why would you risk your life on a forgotten mining shaft?" Thyra met Ragnar's gaze without flinching. "Because I have confirmation, Ragnar. A captive Frankish crossbowman, whom I questioned yesterday, spoke of the tunnel being used for smuggling salt from the interior. He said it is guarded by only 2 men. A quick hand and a silent axe are all that are required." This was a lie. She had extracted the information from a terrified servant, but Thord must have a soldier's proof. Knut considered the risk. A costly, open siege versus the low-cost gamble of a commando raid. He looked at the young warrior who had saved his life. "Why you, Ulfsson? This is not a mission for a herdman. You should be at my side." "Because, Jarl, this is a clean kill. I fight best in the shadow, where my speed is an advantage. Give me 5 men, the fastest, the quietest. I will give you the gatehouse by the morning light." Knut looked at Bjorn, who simply nodded. "He will do it, Jarl. He has the steel for the shadow work." Jarl Knut slammed his drinking horn down. "Very well, Thord Ulfsson. You are the dagger. Take your 5. You go 2 nights before the main assault. If you fail, the siege will proceed, and your memory will be honored. If you succeed, you will have the greatest honor, and you will command a company of your own." The pact was sealed. Thyra had her death mission. It was exactly what she needed, a guaranteed direct route into the heart of Serpent's Hold. Now she had 2 nights to select her 5 companions, procure the necessary gear, and prepare to shed the skin of Thord Ulfsson forever. Her final thought, as she walked out into the cold night, was a silent prayer. "Father, I am coming. Mother, hold fast. The wolf is at the gate." Thyra, as Thord Ulfsson, moved with ruthless focus. She was given 2 days to prepare, and she treated the selection of her 5 companions not as a choice of friends, but as the assembly of a highly specialized killing unit. She needed speed, absolute loyalty to the mission, and men who could follow orders without question, even if those orders seemed insane. She chose Haki as the Quick, a young, wiry man whose specialty was climbing and quiet movement. Haki had the agility of a mountain goat and the eyes of a hawk. He was crucial for scouting the entry point and scaling the mine's entrance. Ketil as the Silent, a dark-skinned man of northern Finnish descent, famous among the wolf pack for his ability to move through deep snow without a sound. He carried a heavy, Frankish-style short sword designed for close quarters fighting. Torvin and Sven as the Twin Shields, two hulking, bearded brothers, inseparable in battle. They lacked Thyra's finesse, but were an immovable object when forming a shield and axe defense. They would be the bulwark if the raid went loud. Thyra felt a grim irony in trusting a man named Sven, but his brute loyalty was undeniable. Bjorn as the Bear. Though not on the original list, Bjorn insisted. He pulled Thyra aside, his eyes demanding, "I am coming, Ulfson. Your father taught you to fight for your brothers, and your brothers don't send a child to the shadow alone. I know how to hold a line in the dark. Don't argue." His experience and the pure gravitational force of his reputation made him the anchor of the group. Thyra did not argue. Bjorn's presence was a risk to her secret, but an invaluable asset to the mission. The gear and the lie. Thyra stripped the team down to the essentials. No heavy mail, only layered leather and black wool to absorb sound and blend with the night. They carried small, silent axes, daggers, and dried rations. Most importantly, they carried flaxen rope and Frankish fire, a sticky, flammable compound stolen from a previous raid, a desperate tool for desperate measures. Before leaving, she gave her team the final instruction, her voice low and serious. "The mission is the gatehouse. We are ghosts. If we are caught, we fight to the last breath, but the goal remains. No looting, no glory seeking. We move as one, and we die as six if necessary. Are you with me?" The 5 men met her gaze, each one nodding a solemn, silent oath. The wolf pack set off on foot, traveling light and fast through the treacherous back country. The journey was a brutal 3-day forced march, avoiding villages and patrols, subsisting on meager food, and sleeping under the cold, indifferent stars. 2 nights before Jarl Knut was due to launch his main assault, the team arrived at the base of the towering crag where Serpent's Hold was built. The mine shaft. Haki, as the Quick, scaled the cliff face, locating the entrance to the old mine, a small, overgrown hole, cleverly disguised by rockfall and thick moss. He signaled the all clear, and the team began their descent. The air inside was thick and stagnant, heavy with the metallic scent of iron and the damp smell of earth. They moved in single file, Haki leading, Thyra second, then Ketil, the Twin Shields, and Bjorn covering the rear. The first obstacle was the guard post. As predicted, 2 of Sven's men, bored and complacent, were huddled around a small, smoky fire deep inside the shaft, far enough in to be away from the night air, but close enough to hear any intruders. Thyra took point with Ketil. They used the absolute darkness between the flicker of the firelight. Thyra, armed with her dagger, pressed against the stone wall. She moved with the predatory grace of a lynx taught to her by Un. Snick. The first guard never made a sound. Thyra's dagger slid under his jaw and into the throat, severing the voice before the pain could register. Ketil was already on the second guard, his short sword expertly driven under the ribs and into the heart. It was over in seconds. They dragged the bodies deeper into a side tunnel, wiped the blood from the stone, and extinguished the pathetic fire. The ascent. The mineshaft was a labyrinth. Thyra, relying on the memory of the stolen maps she had studied, guided them through the twisting, claustrophobic tunnels. The fear of discovery was a palpable, living thing, clinging to their damp clothes. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large stone-lined storeroom, the fortress's underbelly. They had successfully breached the perimeter. The storeroom was filled with barrels of mead, sacks of grain, and stacks of salted fish. 2 sleepy, armed servants were guarding the exit leading up into the main hall. Bjorn and Torvin dealt with them swiftly, efficiently, and silently. They were inside. The ascent from the storeroom brought them into the main kitchen and feasting hall. It was late, but the hall was still alive with the remnants of Sven's revelry, drunken, snoring warriors sprawled on benches, and the faint, flickering light of a few central torches. Thyra's primary target was the inner keep, the central stone tower where Astrid was held. The secondary target was the gatehouse, which needed to be prepared to open for Jarl Knut's army at dawn. She split the team. Bjorn and the twin shields were to move directly to the gatehouse, overpower the small guard, and secure the levers. Their task was to remain absolutely silent and hold the position. Thyra, Haki, and Ketil were to head to the inner keep. A moment of reckoning. Thyra moved through the inner court, her eyes sweeping the shadows. She paused near the blacksmith's forge, the heart of any Viking settlement. Lying on a workbench was a piece of silver she recognized instantly. The Eirik Ironhide family crest, half finished, being hammered into Sven's new grotesque serpent sigil. The sight unleashed a white-hot wave of pure, blinding rage. It was a physical violation of her father's honor. She gripped her axe so hard her knuckles turned white, but she forced the anger down. Not yet. Focus. Vengeance was a dish best served cold, and she needed her mind sharp. She silently destroyed the crest with a quick hammer blow, shattering the desecrated piece of silver. The inner keep. The tower was guarded by 4 seasoned warriors, men who were awake and watchful, recognizing the importance of their charge. Haki, acting as a distraction, silently tossed a small pebble onto the roof of a nearby stable, drawing 2 guards away. As they went to investigate the noise, Thyra and Ketil struck the remaining 2 with a coordinated, brutal rush. They were experts in silent killing, taught by years of necessity. They gained the main stairs. Thyra signaled Haki and Ketil to hold the stairwell. No one was to be allowed up or down. Thyra went up, alone. She reached the top floor, Sven's personal chambers, and the cell where her mother was held. A final, towering mercenary stood guard outside the iron door. He was a Frankish mercenary, his face covered by a nasal helm, his sword a massive 2-handed weapon. He saw her instantly. "Halt! Who are you?" he hissed in broken Norse. Thyra didn't speak. She moved. She didn't use the axe. She relied on speed and agility. She closed the distance before he could fully swing the heavy sword, drawing her own short sword. The blade was lighter, faster. She dodged the first massive blow, the air whistling past her head, and drove her own sword into the mercenary's side, targeting the thin mail between the plate. The man roared, a sound that would echo through the stone walls, bringing guards from all corners. Thyra pulled the sword free, kicked the man's legs out from under him, and then brought her foot down hard on his throat, silencing the alarm. The noise, however, had been made. There was no time left for stealth. The iron door and the reunion. Thyra reached the iron door and slammed her axe into the heavy lock, splintering the aged mechanism. The door burst open. Inside, sitting on a cot in a small, cramped room, was Astrid. She was thinner, paler, but her eyes, her fierce, intelligent eyes, were the same. She stared at the armored figure with the smoking axe, ready for the next ordeal. "Mother," Thyra whispered, the sound a ragged mix of relief and anguish. The carefully crafted, deep voice of Thord Ulfsson momentarily fractured, showing a raw edge of feminine tenderness. Astrid squinted through the gloom. "Who are you? What is this disguise?" Thyra dropped her axe and ripped the linen binding from her chest, tearing her tunic. The sight of her true form, her sweat-damp, short-cut red hair, and the familiar fierce blue of her eyes broke through the years of fear and darkness for Astrid. "Thyra, my gods, my daughter, how long—" "6 years, Mother, not a moment more," Thyra breathed, pulling her mother into a fierce, desperate embrace. "But there is no time. Sven knows we are here. We have to move now. The battle is coming." Suddenly, the pounding of boots echoed up the stone stairwell. The alarm had been raised. "Too late," Astrid said grimly, pulling away and running to the single arrow slit in the room. "Look, child, out there." Thyra rushed to the small window. Down in the courtyard, guards were surging toward the inner keep, but more terrifying was the sight of Sven the Serpent, fully armored, standing outside the gatehouse, bellowing orders. He hadn't been asleep. He had been waiting. And worse, the gatehouse was still closed. Bjorn and the twin shields had failed. "The gate is locked," Thyra spat. "They were waiting for us. It was a trap." "Not a trap, my clever wolf," a cold, smooth voice drawled from the shadows of the doorway. Thyra spun around, her axe flying into her hand. Standing in the doorway, blocking her exit, was not Sven, but Ragnar, Jarl Knut's lieutenant. He held a drawn sword, and a chilling smile played on his lips. "The serpent always leaves his gate ajar for those who come seeking him," Ragnar said, stepping fully into the torchlight. "But only so he can crush them when they try to leave. I led you here, Thyra." The betrayal was a clean, agonizing stab to the heart. Thyra realized the full, terrifying truth. Ragnar was Sven's spy, placed years ago in Knut's court. He hadn't been impressed by Thord Ulfsson's fighting. He had been suspicious. He knew her father, Eirik, and had recognized the raw, familial fury in her eyes during the Battle of Salt Fjord. "You recognized me," Thyra stated, the realization a cold stone in her gut. "I recognized the axe, child," Ragnar corrected, lowering his sword to point at the wolf pommel. "Your father's smithing style is unique, and the hatred. No mere Huskal hates Sven with such purity. I've known Sven since we were boys. He promised me a jarlship for Eirik's lands. Now, give me your mother, and perhaps I'll let your escape be quick." Thyra threw her shield to Astrid. "Hold this, mother." She raised her axe, the wolf pommel warm in her hand. Her final fight had begun not with the serpent, but with the viper who guarded the nest.
The stone chamber, already small, felt suddenly enormous as Thyra and Ragnar circled each other. Outside, the clamor was rising.
Shouts of alarm, the rush of boots, and the frantic pounding on the stairs from the guards below. "You had your chance for a clean death, Thyra," Ragnar said, his sword held in a low, coiled stance. His eyes, once warm with camaraderie, were now cold with avarice. "Hand over the jaws, widow, and I will ensure your body is given a warrior's pyre. Sven wants her alive." "He'll get the widow of Eric, not the hostage of the serpent," Astrid declared, gripping the bronze shield Thyra had thrown her. Her eyes were fixed on Ragnar, burning with contempt. "And he will pay for every moment he held me." Thyra did not spare a glance for her mother. Her focus was total, distilled to a single urgent need: survival and the final kill. "Bjorn, Kettle, Haki, what have you done with my men, traitor?" she demanded, her voice no longer the rough tenor of Thord, but the higher, sharper command of Thyra. Ragnar let out a sharp, joyless laugh. "The bear? He was too loyal to your delusion. He sits in the courtyard, bound and waiting for the executioner. The others? They are in the tunnel, choking on dust. They served their purpose, leading me right to you, my dear Thyra, Eric's daughter." The truth was a heavy, sickening blow. Ragnar had not recognized the axe. He had known Thyra's lineage and used her desperate quest for revenge to betray his own Jarl, Canute the Red, and deliver the final, most valuable piece of Eric's legacy, his only daughter. The duel in the keep. Ragnar lunged first, a trained, vicious thrust aimed at Thyra's exposed abdomen. Thyra parried the blow with a clash of metal that sparked in the gloom, pushing his sword wide. She was faster, but Ragnar was stronger and fought with the practiced economy of a lifelong mercenary. The duel was brutal, fought in the tight space between the cot and the iron door. Thyra used her axe in short, rapid bursts, relying on its balance to force Ragnar to retreat. He fought defensively, waiting for the exhaustion to set in, waiting for the girl beneath the armor to falter. A furious blow from Ragnar sent Thyra staggering back into the cell wall. Her helmet was jarred, and the straps loosened. As she steadied herself, Ragnar saw his chance and struck again, aiming for her exposed neck. But he underestimated Astrid. The Jarl's widow, once a hostage, became a Shieldmaiden. Astrid roared, a sound of pure maternal fury, and slammed the heavy bronze shield into Ragnar's sword arm with crushing force. Ragnar's blade clattered to the stone floor, his scream of pain cut short by surprise. "Run, child! Your father's blood runs in your veins! Take your vengeance!" This distraction was all Thyra needed. She surged forward, her axe a silver blur. She didn't chop. She hooked the crescent blade under Ragnar's helmet's edge and pulled. The move was taught to her by Un, a brutal, disarming maneuver designed to take the head off. Ragnar stumbled back, tearing his helmet free just as the axe swung down. It caught him on the collarbone with a sickening crack, shattering the bone and sending him crashing against the opposite wall, gasping for breath. "You will not have a warrior's pyre, Ragnar," Thyra spat, standing over him, the bloody axe ready. "You will be burned with the refuse." She raised the axe for the final blow. The serpent's entrance.
"A dramatic gesture, daughter of Eric Ironhide," a cold voice echoed up the stairwell. Thyra froze. She recognized the chilling, amused cadence. Sven the Serpent was standing on the landing below, flanked by a squad of his heavily armed housecarls. He wore heavy, polished mail and held a magnificent warhammer. Sven slowly ascended the final stairs, stepping over the mercenary Thyra had killed. He paused before Ragnar, who whimpered in pain. Sven simply nudged his fallen spy with a boot. "You failed, little snake," Sven murmured without pity. Then his cold, ice-chip eyes lifted to Thyra, and he smiled, a truly terrifying expression of power and malicious triumph.
You have been a costly annoyance, Thord Ulfson. Your fighting amused my men, but I always knew that a true Huskarl fights for gold. Only a daughter fights for a family that is dust. He stepped fully into the light, staring at Thyra's revealed body and the fierce intensity of her face. You look like your mother, but you have the fury of your father, and you have walked right into my long-awaited execution chamber. He lifted his hammer, his massive frame filling the doorway. Tonight, the line of Eric Ironhide ends. I will take your mother to solidify my jarlship, and I will hang you from the battlements, a warning to all who dare to seek justice. The desperate choice. Thyra knew she couldn't win. She was one against many, and Sven was a giant of a man, a veteran of countless battles, protected by his elite guard. Her mission had failed. Her men were dead or captured, but she would not die a hostage. I will never have your mother, Thyra declared, stepping back and putting Astrid behind her. Brave words, girl, Sven sneered, raising the warhammer. Suddenly, a massive guttural roar echoed up the courtyard, a sound so unexpected, so powerful, it made the stone wall shake. The bear is loose! From the arrow slit, Astrid cried out, Look, the gatehouse! Thyra rushed to the window. Down in the courtyard, her men had not failed. Bjorn the bear, though wounded, had broken his bonds and was fighting like the berserker Sven had accused Byra of being. He and the twin shields, having freed themselves, were locked in a desperate battle with the gatehouse guards. And there, a flash of fire erupted from the base of the gatehouse tower. Haki and Ketil, having fought their way back from the tunnel, had followed Thyra's final desperate order. If they could not open the gate, they would destroy the mechanism using the Frankish fire. The thick, sticky flames began to lick up the heavy wooden gate. They are opening the gate! Stop them! Sven roared, momentarily forgetting Thyra in his panic to save his fortress. He turned and plunged down the stairs, bellowing orders to his guards. This was her chance. Mother, the window, now! The window was small, little more than an arrow slit, but outside the wall dropped 30 feet to a small sloping section of the roof. I can't, Thyra. I'm too old for that drop, Astrid cried. Yes, you can, Thyra said, grabbing her mother and pushing her towards the opening. She retrieved the ropes from her belt and secured one end to a heavy stone carving on the wall. Haki is waiting. He will catch you. She forced her mother out onto the sill. Go! I will cover you! As Astrid began her slow, terrified descent, Thyra stepped back into the doorway, her axe held high, ready to meet the remaining 2 guards that Sven had left behind. You want the daughter of Eric? Thyra screamed, her voice finally breaking free, raw, high, and utterly fearless. Come and take her! She plunged down the stairwell, meeting the guards in a confined, bloody melee, buying the precious seconds her mother needed to escape, and buying the precious moments for the Frankish fire to do its final vengeful work.